Right now, there is a 48-hour clock ticking down on the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, and it's a terrifying countdown.
It really is. I mean, if that ultimatum actually hits zero, you're looking at up to 30% of the world's oil trade just instantly bottlenecking.
Right, which would send immediate shockwaves through the entire global economy.
Exactly. But the most mind-bending part of this whole military standoff, the thing we're really focusing on today, isn't the weaponry. It's not the immediate political posturing you're seeing in all the headlines right now.
No, the real story is the underlying legal paradox.
Yes, because the two main players here, the United States and Iran, they are fully prepared to go to war over completely differing interpretations of a rulebook that, ironically, neither of them has fully ratified.
It's a profound geopolitical contradiction, honestly. And for this deep dive, our mission is to look strictly at the sources we've got and unpack the underlying source code of this specific conflict.
Right, we're totally bypassing the daily news cycle today.
Exactly. We want to examine the strategic significance of the Strait of Hormuz through the lens of a highly complex, fiercely contested framework, which is the international law of the sea.
Because to understand what happens in the next 48 hours, you really have to understand how the world's oceans are actually governed.
And that governance is not at all what you might assume.
No, it's really not. Like, you look at a map and the oceans just seem like this open, untethered blue space. You think, you fire up a ship, draw a line from point A to point B, and you just go.
Right, the freedom of the seas.
Yeah, but when you zoom in on geographical choke points, places like Hormuz, that blank canvas suddenly reveals these invisible, heavily militarized tripwires.
Absolutely.
So before we get to the current ultimatum, let's establish some ground rules for the listener. Why does a narrow strip of water become such a legal nightmare in the first place? Like, what legally qualifies as an international strait?
Well, under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea.
Which we'll just call UNCLOS, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly, UNCLS. Specifically, if you look at Articles 34 through 37, an international strait is defined by a very strict set of criteria.
Okay.
First, it must be a naturally formed narrow waterway, so no canals.
Right.
Second, it has to connect two parts of the high seas or exclusive economic zones. And crucially, it must be demonstrably used for international navigation.
Meaning people actually have to be sailing through it regularly.
Right. It's not simply a matter of cartography. Actual maritime practice dictates its status. So places like the Strait of Gibraltar, the Strait of Malacca, the Bab el-Mandeb, and of course Hormuz, they all fit this definition perfectly.
But geography is really what creates the immediate friction in Hormuz, right? Because we are talking about a waterway that at its absolute narrowest point is only 21 nautical miles wide.
Yeah, 21 miles is incredibly narrow when you're talking about international shipping lanes.
And it sits directly between Iran to the north and Oman to the south. And, historically, coastal nations didn't just own the beach, they owned the water extending off the coast.
They did. And that was based on a really old principle known as the cannon shot rule.
The cannon shot rule. I love this concept. It's so literal.
It really is. For centuries, a coastal state's territorial waters, which is the zone where their sovereignty was legally identical to their land territory.
Right.
That zone extended roughly 3 to 6 nautical miles outward. And the logic was just entirely pragmatic.
Basically, you effectively owned the water as far out as your coastal artillery could fire Cannonball.
Exactly. If your military could defend that patch of water from the shore, it belonged to you.
But obviously, ballistics improved over time.
Dramatically. By the mid-20th century, artillery and missile technology advanced so much that the international community eventually agreed to expand that territorial claim out to 12 nautical miles from the coast.
Okay, wait. So if the Strait of Hormuz is only 21 miles wide at its narrowest, and this new rule suddenly granted both Iran and Oman 12 miles of absolute sovereignty.
The math immediately breaks.
Yeah. 12 plus 12 is 24. The entire 21-mile width is completely swallowed up by these overlapping territorial claims.
Exactly. The international corridor just vanishes overnight.
So how did the global shipping industry not completely panic at this realization?
Oh, they did panic. And the major naval powers panicked even more.
I can imagine.
Because if the world's most essential maritime choke points suddenly became the private, sovereign property of these coastal states, global trade and military mobility would just grind to a halt.
Right. A coastal state could theoretically just close the gate and say, you can't come in.
Exactly. And that terrifying realization sparked decades of fierce legal battles to engineer some sort of workaround. The foundational precedent for solving this actually goes back to the 1949 Corfu Channel case.
Oh, at the International Court of Justice, right. This is a dispute between the UK and Albania.
That's the one.
Basically, the British sent warships through a channel off the Albanian coast. They hit some mines, and it triggered this massive legal showdown over who actually had the right to be there.
That is the core of it, yeah. And the vital legal mechanism that emerged from that ruling was this principle called non-suspendable innocent passage.
Non-suspendable innocent passage. Okay.
Right. The court ruled that in straits used for international navigation, a coastal state cannot arbitrarily suspend the passage of foreign vessels.
Even if those vessels are sailing directly through the coastal state's own sovereign territorial waters.
Exactly. That was the huge compromise.
Okay, but innocent passage sounds really reasonable on paper. But if you're a global superpower looking to project military force, or I don't know, a massive shipping conglomerate wanting absolute certainty, the word innocent comes with a lot of heavy strings attached, doesn't it?
It does. It comes with massive strings. Under the rules of innocent passage, a foreign ship must travel continuously and rapidly. No stopping, no anchoring, unless it's an emergency.
Right, you just have to keep moving.
Keep moving. But more importantly, the coastal state retains this really broad authority to determine if a ship's passage is, quote, prejudicial to their peace, good order, or security.
Oh, wow. That is a massive loophole for the coastal state.
Huge. And the restrictions are severe. Like, a submarine utilizing innocent passage is legally required to surface and fly its flag.
You can't just sneak through underwater?
Nope. And a warship is strictly prohibited from launching or recovering aircraft, or, in today's terms, surveillance drones.
Okay, yeah. If you're the United States or the Soviet Union operating at the height of the Cold War, that is a total non-starter.
Absolutely.
You are not going to ask some coastal state for permission to move an aircraft carrier, and you are definitely not going to surface your nuclear deterrent submarines just to cross from, the Indian Ocean to the Persian Gulf.
Which is exactly why innocent passage was deemed entirely insufficient by the superpowers as soon as those territorial waters formally expanded to 12 miles.
It just didn't give them the freedom they needed.
Right. So this clash of interests is what culminated in the negotiations for UNCLOS, which, by the way, dragged on from 1973 all the way to 1982.
Almost a decade.
Yeah, it was one of those complex diplomatic undertakings in human history. To solve this strait problem, the negotiators had to engineer a massive geopolitical package compromise.
Basically a grand bargain between the developing coastal nations and the global superpowers.
Exactly.
And the sources outline this grand bargain, and it's fascinating because it reveals how international law is, at the end of the day, essentially just high-stakes horse trading.
It really is.
Because developing nations were granted something unprecedented here, right? These 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zones, or EEs.
Yes, and that was just a staggering transfer of wealth and jurisdiction.
I mean, 200 miles is huge.
It is. Many developing nations, particularly across Africa and South America, they lack massive industrialized fishing fleets of their own.
Right.
But by gaining exclusive legal rights to all the resources within 200 miles of their coastlines, they could suddenly monetize their geography.
They could sell those rights.
Exactly. They could sell highly lucrative fishing and extraction concessions to foreign industrialized fleets. It's like this massive financial jackpot for them.
But the superpowers, the US and the USSR, who were acting in an incredibly rare moment of Cold War alignment here.
Yeah, they were entirely on the same page for once.
Right. They demanded a really steep price for agreeing to hand over those massive EZs. They demanded the creation of a brand new legal concept for international straits called transit passage.
Right. And transit passage is fundamentally different from innocent passage.
How so?
Well, it heavily restricts the sovereignty of the coastal state and massively expands the rights of the passing vessel. It basically guarantees a continuous, rapid, and entirely non-suspendable flow of ships and aircraft.
Aircraft too.
Yes, overflight is included.
Yeah.
Under transit passage, a coastal state's ability to interfere is basically reduced to just enforcing basic navigational safety and pollution control.
Okay, so they can say don't spill oil, but that's about it.
Pretty much. A coastal state cannot legally stop a warship. They cannot force a submarine to surface. It effectively artificially preserves the freedom of the high seas right inside another nation's sovereign territorial waters.
Wait, okay. I see a glaring issue here. If the UNCLOS treaty offered developing nations these 200-mile exclusive economic zones, that's obviously a massive financial windfall for countries with long oceanic coastlines.
Right, like Chile or South Africa.
But why would a country like Iran, whose entire strategic leverage comes from controlling a narrow 21-mile strait, why would they ever sacrifice their military control over that choke point?
You've hit the nail on the head.
I mean, the math on that grand bargain doesn't seem to add up for them at all. They wouldn't care about offshore fishing rights when their real power is holding the physical keys to the Persian Gulf.
You've identified the exact flaw in the UNCLOS consensus. Yeah. And it is the direct root of the Hormuz loophole we are facing today.
Okay, so Iran saw this coming.
Oh, they recognized that terrible math immediately. And they actively resisted these liberalized passage rules from the very beginning. If you go back to the 1958 Geneva Conventions, which predated UNCLOS, Iran voted against the rules of innocent passage for straits.
Wow, so this is a long-standing position.
Very long-standing. And during the UNCLOS negotiations in the 1970s, Iran, alongside Oman and several other nations that bordered vital straits, they mounted this fierce diplomatic resistance.
They wanted a different set of rules entirely. The sources mention they actually proposed a specific regime for semi-enclosed seas like the Persian Gulf.
Yes. Iran demanded that foreign warships should be legally required to obtain prior consent from the coastal state before entering the strait.
Prior consent, meaning the U.S. Navy would have to ask Tehran for permission every time they wanted to sail into the Gulf.
Exactly. And the superpowers, recognizing that this would effectively hand Iran a veto over global naval mobility, ensured that proposal was overwhelmingly rejected.
Yeah, the U.S. and the Soviets were never going to agree to that.
Not in a million years. The U.S. and the Soviet Union insisted on the uniform, universal application of transit passage across all international straits.
So the grand bargain is finalized in 1982, but Iran's primary strategic concern is completely ignored. What is their next move? Because they clearly don't just roll over and accept a legal framework that neutralizes their geographic advantage.
No, they didn't. They executed a very deliberate legal maneuver. Iran actually signed the UNCLOS convention.
Right, they signed it.
They signed it, but they never took the final binding step. They never ratified it through their domestic government.
Ah, okay, that's a huge distinction.
It is. And upon signing, Iran attached a highly specific interpretive declaration.
What did it say?
They stated explicitly that, in their legal view, the concept of transit passage is purely a contractual trade-off. It is a treaty-based quid pro quo that only applies to the specific member states that both signed and ratified the convention.
Okay. It's like two neighbors fighting over an easement on a shared driveway.
Right.
The U.S. claims public right-of-way because people have been driving on it for decades. But Iran is pointing to a property deed that neither of them actually bother to officially file with the county clerk.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize the deadlock. I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Iran's argument hinges on the assertion that transit passage is not, quote, customary international law.
Customary law. Explain that a bit for us.
Sure. Customary law refers to those unwritten rules that become universally binding simply because states have consistently practiced them over time out of a sense of legal obligation.
Like a common law marriage for countries.
Exactly. But Iran rejects that transit passage has achieved this status. Therefore, Iran insists that within its territorial waters in the Strait of Hormuz, only the older, highly restrictive regime of innocent passage applies.
Which, as we discussed, gives Iran the legal cover, under their own interpretation anyway, to monitor, restrict, or outright block vessels, especially military ones, that they deem a threat to their security.
Yes, but then we have Oman.
Right. Oman sits right across the water, forming the southern border of the strait.
And Oman did ratify UNCLOS.
Yeah.
Oman legally recognizes the right of transit passage.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this creates a completely schizophrenic legal reality in the Strait of Hormuz. The rights of a supertanker or a U.S. destroyer technically shift depending on whose side of the invisible maritime median line they happen to be sailing on.
That is insane. This brings us right back to the United States Navy, which routinely sails carrier strike groups directly through the Strait of Hormuz.
We do.
If Iran claims innocent passage and Oman claims transit passage, what is the American legal justification here? Especially considering the U.S. never ratified UNCLOS either, because, domestic politics kept the U.S. from formally joining the very treaty they engineered.
Right. The U.S. is not a party to UNCLOS. But the American position relies heavily on that exact concept of customary international law that Iran rejects.
Ah, so the U.S. says, we don't need the piece of paper. Everyone already acts like this is the role.
Precisely. The United States asserts that over the decades, the global practice of transit passage has become so widespread and universally accepted that it has crystallized into customary law.
It's just a universal right now.
Yes, independent of the UNCLOS treaty document itself. And the way the United States enforces this interpretation is through physical practice.
They use their naval presence to literally demonstrate the custom.
Exactly.
They sail the ships through to prove that the right exists, while Iran continually protests to demonstrate that they do not consent to the custom forming.
It's incredible. They are trapped in this performative legal loop.
Performative legal loop. That is the perfect phrase for it.
And the sources make it clear that this is not a new phenomenon at all. This specific legal tension traces all the way back to the 1950s. The 48-hour ultimatum dominating the news right now is really just the latest highly volatile symptom of a foundational disagreement that was simply never resolved.
So, if UNCLOS is practically resulting in a militarized legal stalemate between the US and Iran today, how does the global economy function in other major choke points? Because the Strait of Hormuz can't be the only narrow strip of water causing headaches.
Oh, it definitely isn't.
Did international law ever actually get this right historically? Like, are there alternative rule books out there?
There are, actually. And they exist because of a massive intentional loophole written directly into UNCLOS itself.
Really? A loophole for what?
If you look at Article 35 scenes of the convention, it explicitly states that the modern rules of transit passage do not affect the legal regimes in straits that are already regulated by long-standing historical international conventions.
So if a waterway was governed by a specialized treaty from, say, a century ago, it just gets grandfathered in, UNCLOS essentially steps back and lets the old rules apply.
Exactly. These straits operate as distinct time capsules of maritime law. They're frozen in the geopolitical realities of the eras in which their treaties were drafted.
That is fascinating. Give us an example from the sources.
A prime example is the Turkish Straits, the Bosporus and the Dardanelles. They are governed by the Montreux Convention of 1936.
1936. Okay, so we are talking about a treaty drafted in the direct shadow of a looming world war.
Exactly. And the anxieties of 1936 Europe are baked right into the text of Montreux. Unlike the open, frictionless transit passage championed by UNCLOS, the Montreux Convention fundamentally prioritizes security over mobility.
It locks it down.
It really does. It grants Turkey incredibly strict military control over the straits. It places severe tonnage and duration limits on the warships of non-Black Sea nations.
So you can't just park a massive fleet there indefinitely.
No, absolutely not. And most importantly, it grants Turkey the explicit legal right to entirely block the passage of warships if Turkey considers itself to be threatened with imminent danger of war.
Wow. That is a stark contrast to Hormuz. I mean, Turkey holds a far tighter, internationally recognized legal grip on its straits than Iran is even attempting to argue for under innocent passage.